Nobody in that room could breathe without permission. Not because a preacher was talking, because a young woman had a revolver leveled at his face and she wasn't trembling. I stood off to the side where shadows mind their business, close enough to see the little things. The way her elbow locked hard like she'd practiced on a wall, not a man. The way the barrel stayed steady, not drifting, not begging. The way the preacher kept his hands open at his waist, palms forward, no surrender in it, just acceptance. 300 souls in those pews, Sunday collars and pressed dresses, mothers holding babies too quiet for their age, men with church shoes that had seen better streets, everybody frozen like the room had turned to glass. Harlem knows violence. But violence inside a sanctuary hits different. It don't just threaten a body, it threatens order. Her name was Nina Ward, schoolteacher, the kind that corrected your grammar while your knuckles were still bleeding. 25, eyes sharp, face calm like she'd already buried what she came to kill. The man in front of her was Reverend Clay. Folks called him Reverend like it was his first name. 60 years old, hair gone silver, suit black and plain, the kind of clean that never tried to impress. 10 years he'd been the wall between our people and the animals that liked to hunt in packs. 10 years of him showing up before trouble got brave. But Nina didn't come for his sermons. She came for his sin. "Don't say my name," she told him, voice low enough to make you lean in. He didn't flinch. Didn't step back, that's what made it worse. "I wasn't going to," Reverend Clay said. His voice had that quiet weight, like he'd spent a lifetime choosing words the way men choose bullets. "I was going to ask you to put it down." Nina's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to ask." A few people in the pews made that tiny sound, like a prayer trying to crawl out but scared to be seen. A deacon's wife pressed her hand to her throat. A little boy started to stand and his mama pulled him down so fast the pew creaked. I watched Clay's face. A man can fear death and hide it, but sadness, that's harder to disguise. His eyes had that deep, tired look, like he'd been paying interest on something for decades and the debt still wasn't shrinking. Nina took one step closer. The revolver followed her like it was tied to her heart. "My father didn't get to live long enough to grow old," she said. "He didn't get gray hair. He didn't get to stand in front of people and be called good." Clay swallowed once, slow, controlled, like even his throat was trying to stay respectable. "I know why you're here," he said. Nina's mouth tightened. "Then don't insult me with that calm. Now let me tell you something about rooms like this. A church ain't just wood and hymnals, it's a territory. And territory always has rules. Even God got rules. But the moment Nina lifted that gun, she rewrote them all. "Say it," she told him. "Say what you did." Clay looked past her for half a second, just a flicker. Not at the congregation, not at the cross. Past her like he was looking down a hallway only he could see. Then he nodded. "I killed him," he said. The words fell heavy. Not dramatic, not loud, just final. That's when the pews finally moved, people shifted, gasped. A woman started to cry and stopped herself like she was ashamed to make noise. A man in the second row stood halfway up, then sat back down when his knees realized they didn't have a plan. Nina didn't blink. She'd already lived with the truth. This was just the moment it got spoken out loud where it could cut everybody else too. "You killed Marcus Ward," she said. "Behind a warehouse in Birmingham, he was running. He wasn't armed. He wasn't fighting. He was trying to get home to his daughter." Clay's eyelids fluttered, just once. That was the only crack. "I didn't know he had a daughter," he said. Nina gave him a look like he'd offered her a coupon. "You didn't ask," she said. Clay nodded again. "No, I didn't." Then Nina leaned in close enough that the muzzle was almost touching his skin. "And you've been standing in here," she whispered, "talking about forgiveness like you invented it." Clay didn't argue. That's the part that scared the room. Men who did wrong usually run their mouth when the bill comes due. Clay didn't. He just stood there and let the debt show. From where I was, I could see his right hand shaking. Not a lot. Just enough to tell me his body wanted to fight his soul and couldn't win. Nina's finger rested on the trigger like it belonged there. "So tell me," she said, "why shouldn't I end you right here? In front of everybody, so they remember what you really are." Clay finally looked at the congregation. Not pleading, Not hiding, just counting, like he was checking who'd still be alive if Nina pulled that trigger. "Because you're not the only one holding a gun," he said. That put a chill in the air. Nina's eyes cut to the pews. People tensed. Men's hands moved inside jackets without thinking. A few of the older women looked toward the exits like they already knew those doors didn't belong to them anymore. Clay spoke again, steady. "Outside this building," he said, "there are men who don't care what God you pray to. They care who you are when you walk home." He turned back to Nina. "They've been quiet because I kept them quiet." Nina's jaw worked. "You think you're some kind of shield?" "What?" "I don't think," Clay said. "I know, because I used to be one of them." Now the room truly went cold. That kind of confession don't just stain a man, it stains the air around him. Nina's voice dropped even lower. "Say it clean." Clay didn't hesitate this time. "Down south," he said, "I rode with men who wore masks and smiled under them. I did what they did. I hurt who they hurt. I took lives that weren't mine to take." A murmur tried to rise. Nina's head snapped toward the pews like a warning shot without sound. The murmur died. Clay kept going, and his calm was worse than shouting. A man screaming can be dismissed. Calm means he means every syllable. "I came up here to Harlem with a suitcase and a name nobody recognized," he said. "I built a pulpit because it was the only place a man like me could stand and be watched. I stayed in the light on purpose." Nina's eyes glistened, but she refused to blink, refused to let the tears complete themselves. "So you can hide," she said. "So I can work," Clay corrected. Nina laughed once sharp. "Work? You think this is a job?" Clay's lips pressed together. He looked older in that moment. "Every morning," he said, "I wake up with faces on my ceiling. Every night I hear footsteps that ain't there. You think I'm free because folks shake my hand. I ain't been free a day since I pulled that trigger." Nina's gun didn't move, but her shoulders rose slightly like the rage had found a new place to live. "You're still standing," she said. "My father is." Clay nodded. "I can't fix that." "Then what good are you?" Nina snapped. Clay inhaled slow. "I've kept people alive," he said, "not as a favor, as payment." Nina's eyes narrowed. "Payment don't bring the dead back." "No," Clay admitted, "but it keeps the living from joining them." He shifted his gaze toward the front doors. That's when I noticed it too, the slight change in the room's sound, like the building itself had started listening harder. Nina followed his eyes, then looked back at him. "What are you hearing?" she asked. Clay didn't answer right away. He was calculating. He always calculated. "You came in here thinking the danger was me," he said quietly. "And I get it. I earned that." His voice dropped another notch. "But there are men outside who would love nothing more than to watch you put me down. Because once I'm gone, nobody's stopping them from coming back for what they miss." Nina's nostrils flared. "You talking about who?" Clay's mouth tightened like he tasted something rotten. "Riker," he said, "and the ones who answer when he whistles." A ripple went through the pews. That name carried weight in Harlem, even if folks pretended it didn't. A man with friends in uniforms and cousins in back rooms. A man who sold fear like it was candy. Nina's voice stayed hard. "So your life is leverage." Clay met her eyes. "My life is a lock," he said, "and you're standing here with the key in your hand." Silence stretched, the kind that makes you hear fabric move. The kind that makes your heartbeat sound like it's confessing too. Nina swallowed once. That was the first sign she was human. "You saved people," she said, like the words tasted bitter. "That's what they say." Clay didn't boast, didn't nod, just said yes. "Why?" Nina asked. Clay's face tightened. "Because I know how predators think," he said, "and I know what they're scared of." Nina's eyes flicked toward the congregation, toward the mothers, toward the kids. "So you get to live," she said, "because you're useful." Clay's stare didn't break. "I don't get to live," he said. "I get to work. There's a difference." Then Nina did something I didn't expect. She lowered the gun, not all the way, just enough that the barrel stopped kissing his forehead. And when she spoke, the whole room leaned toward her like one body. "Tell me," she said, "how my father died." Clay closed his eyes for a moment like he had to open a door he hated. When he opened them again, he wasn't in that church anymore. He was somewhere else, somewhere wet, somewhere dark. And I knew before he said a word that the story he was about to tell wasn't for forgiveness. It was for control, because men like Clay, men like me, we don't survive by hiding from the past. We survive by learning how to aim it. Clay's lips parted. Then a hard knock hit the church doors. Not polite. Not curious. A knock that said, "We're already inside your life." Every head turned. Clay didn't. He kept his eyes on Nina and spoke so softly only the front rows could hear. "They're early," he said. Nina's grip tightened again, the revolver rising like a thought turning into a decision. And from the back pew, I saw a young man slip out the side aisle, quiet, quick, like he'd been waiting for that knock all along. That knock wasn't asking permission. It was telling the room the streets don't respect stained glass. I watched Nina angle her body without thinking, half turned to the doors, gun still trained on Clay like she didn't trust him to stay honest if her eyes left him. Smart move. In this world, the second you split your attention, somebody takes your life as a shortcut. Clay didn't rush the door. He didn't even raise his voice. He just said, "Nobody move." And the way he said it, it wasn't a plea. It was a command that expected obedience. Another knock came, faster this time, harder. Like whoever was outside had a schedule. A few folks started to rise anyway, fear making them stupid. Clay lifted one hand, palm out, and they sat back down like puppets remembering their strings. He leaned closer to Nina, careful, like he knew one wrong breath could set her off. "That ain't them," he murmured. "Not yet." Nina's eyes narrowed. "Then who?" Clay's gaze flicked to the side aisle, to where that young man had slipped out seconds earlier. That told me everything I needed to know. In every crowd, there's always one person playing their own game. Clay called out without shouting, "Who's there?" A voice answered through the door. Male, young, trying to sound calm and failing. "It's Eli," the voice said. "Let me in, Reverend." Clay's jaw tightened. He didn't move. He asked again, "Eli who?" A pause, a swallow you could hear through wood. "Eli Tucker," the voice said, "please." Some people in the pews exhaled like they'd been holding a breath for a year. Tucker was a name folks recognized. Not powerful, not connected, just decent, and decency gets hunted. Clay nodded once like he'd solved a piece of math he didn't like and walked to the door slow, not cautious, deliberate. He opened it a crack. A boy stumbled in, soaked to the bone, breath coming in ragged pulls. 19, maybe, rain clinging to him like guilt. His eyes were wide and wild, scanning the room like he expected a bullet to come out of the hymnals. Clay shut the door behind him, slid the lock, and turned. "What did you do?" Clay asked. Eli shook his head fast. "Nothing." "I didn't do nothing." Nina's voice cut in sharp. "They always say that." Eli looked at the gun, then at Nina's face, and his fear doubled. He lifted both hands like the air might arrest him. "They say I disrespected Miss Lorna," he blurted. "I didn't. I swear. I walked past the store and I looked at the ground like I'm supposed to. I ain't even breathe in her direction." There it was, the kind of crime that only exists when a certain kind of man needs a reason. Clay didn't ask for details. He already knew the pattern. He looked past Eli like he could see the street outside through walls. "How long?" Clay asked. Eli blinked. "What?" "How long till they come?" Clay repeated. Eli's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a kid trying to guess the weather while standing in the storm. "Soon," he whispered. "They already gathering, I heard it. Mr. Riker's people and the ones that smile too much." A murmur moved through the pews. Fear has a sound. It's not a scream. It's that quiet shifting like rats behind a wall. Nina stared at Clay, suspicion carving her face into stone. "So this is what you do," she said. "You keep a boy alive and you want credit for it." Clay's eyes stayed steady. "This ain't for credit." "What is it for?" she snapped. Clay looked at her gun, then back to her eyes. "For preventing funerals." Nina's voice lowered. "Convenient timing. You tell me you killed my father and now the whole neighborhood needs you." Clay didn't flinch. The neighborhood needed me before you walked in here. You just found out why. What? Eli took a step back, confused, overwhelmed. Wait, he said. What's she talking about? Nobody answered him. Nobody wanted to. Some truths are like broken glass. The more you touch them, the more they cut. Clay moved toward the front of the sanctuary, eyes scanning faces. He saw the same thing I saw, a room full of people who had survived by staying quiet, and a storm outside that didn't care about quiet. Clay spoke low but clear. Listen to me. If they come to these doors, you don't rush. You don't scream. You don't give them panic to feed on. A man in the pews stood up halfway. Reverend, they got rifles. Clay looked at him, and we got each other. That wasn't comfort, that was strategy. He turned to Eli. You came here alone. Eli nodded fast. Yes, sir. My mama wanted to come, but I told her stay put. Clay's eyes narrowed. Where's your father? Eli swallowed. At the house with the shotgun, he said he'd hold them off. Clay's face tightened like somebody had pulled a string behind his eyes. He's gonna die for pride, Clay said quietly. Nina heard that. Her voice softened just a fraction, the tiniest crack in all that anger. You care now. Clay looked at her like she'd asked him if fire was hot. I care, he said. That's what makes this hell. Another sound hit the building, faint at first, then louder. Not knocking. Voices. A group of men moving together, letting the night hear them coming. Torches crackling. Boots splashing through puddles. Laughter that didn't belong anywhere near a church. The congregation stiffened. A child started to cry, then got muffled against a mother's chest. Eli whispered, "That's them." Clay didn't rush. He didn't dramatize. He walked to the lectern, reached under it, and pulled out a small oil lamp and a match like he'd been expecting this his whole life. He lit it, and the flame jumped up, soft and steady. Then he looked at Nina. You wanted to know how your father died, Clay said. Nina's gun stayed raised, but her eyes locked on him. Talk. Clay's gaze drifted far away, and his voice changed. Not louder, just heavier. It was raining, he said. The kind of rain that makes roads disappear. The room went silent because now it wasn't just a mob outside. It was a memory inside. Clay continued, slow. That night, a young man sat in a cabin, waiting for trouble to decide he was worth the walk. Nina's lips pressed tight. She listened like she hated herself for listening. Clay's eyes stayed distant. He had a mother praying at a table and a father staring out a window like staring hard enough could stop evil from arriving. Outside, the voices got closer. Somebody laughed sharp and mean. Somebody shouted a name. Eli flinched. They calling for me. Clay kept speaking like his words were the only thing holding the room together. I showed up, he said, not with a Bible, with knowledge. Nina's voice cut in. Knowledge of what? Clay glanced at her. Of who? He turned slightly, listening to the mob's position, mapping it like a general. That's what men like Riker don't understand, he said. They think the scariest thing in the world is a gun. It ain't. His eyes met Nina's again. The scariest thing, he said, is a man who knows your secrets and ain't emotional about using them. The church doors shook, one hard impact like someone testing the lock. A shout from outside, close enough now that you could hear the smile in it. Open UP, preacher. Clay didn't move, he didn't blink. Nina's finger tightened on the trigger again, and in the back row I saw something else, two men who weren't praying, weren't scared. Just watching the exits like they were counting bodies before they fell. That's when I knew. The danger wasn't only outside the church. It had already sat down among us. I clocked them the moment Eli did. Two men, third row back, left side. Not praying, not panicking, shoes too clean for the rain outside, eyes moving, not reacting. You don't survive long in this game without learning the difference between fear and patience. Clay felt them too. He didn't look. He never did when he knew something was true. The pounding came again. Harder, wood flexed. Old hinges screamed. Open it, Clay, a voice called. Older, confident. The kind of confidence that comes from knowing the law won't interrupt you. We just want the boy. Nina turned her head slightly. That Riker. Clay nodded once. That's him. Eli's knees buckled. He grabbed the pew to stay upright. His mother's face must have flashed in his mind because he whispered, "I ain't ready to die." Clay's voice softened just enough to keep the boy standing. "Most men ain't. That's why monsters count on it." Another slam. Dust shook loose from the rafters. One of the men in the third row leaned forward, whispered something to the other. I didn't hear the words. I didn't need to. They were measuring time. Clay kept talking like the past was a weapon he'd finally decided to unsheath. "Your father ran," he said to Nina, eyes still distant. "Not because he was scared, because he wanted to live." Nina swallowed. The gun wavered for half a second. She corrected it immediately, angry at herself for the slip. "He almost made it," Clay went on. "Trees were thick. Rain was loud. If he'd turned left instead of right." He stopped, not for drama, for honesty. "I was faster." Outside, Riker laughed. "Last chance, preacher." Clay raised his voice just enough to carry. "Go home." The laughter stopped. That's when Riker spoke again, slower now, meaner. "You don't run this block no more. You confessed. You done." Clay smiled, sad, real. "I've been done a long time," he said. "You're just late." A torch smashed against a side window. Glass exploded inward. A woman screamed before she could stop herself. Smoke curled in like a living thing. That's when the men in the third row stood, too smooth, too calm. One of them reached inside his coat. I moved before thought caught up. "Don't," I barked, loud enough to cut through panic. Heads turned. Nina's eyes snapped toward me. Clay finally looked. The man froze, just a second, long enough. Clay pointed at him. "Sit down." The man hesitated. Riker's voice shouted outside, "Light it." Flame bloomed against the outer wall. The second man reached again. Nina fired, not at Clay, at the floor. The shot cracked the air open. Splinters jumped. Everybody froze, mob, spies, congregation, all reminded what real power sounds like. Nina's voice was iron. "Next one goes through a chest." The men sat. Clay exhaled slow, like he'd been holding that breath since 1872. Smoke thickened. Heat crept. Eli cried openly now. "They gonna burn us alive." Clay looked around the room, counting exits, windows, lives. Then he said the words that change games. "Back windows," he ordered. "Children first." Parents moved on instinct. No screaming, no chaos, fear disciplined by necessity. Riker roared outside. "I see 'em. Shoot if they run." Clay stepped toward the door. Nina snapped, "Don't." He didn't stop. "If they're looking at me, they ain't aiming at kids." He reached the door, unlatched it, stepped into firelight. Rain hissed against flame. Torches wavered. Rifles lifted. Riker stood there smiling, coat dry, eyes dead. Still playing hero. Clay met his gaze. Still hiding behind numbers. Riker raised his rifle, and from the darkness behind him, a shot rang out, not from Riker's men, from the street. Everyone turned. A dozen silhouettes stood there, soaked, armed, unmoving. At their front was Eli's father, shotgun steady, eyes burning. "I ain't raising another orphan," he said. More figures stepped up. Men Clay had saved. Men who owed nothing but remembered everything. Riker's smile cracked. And behind him, someone whispered his name wrong. That's when Riker realized the board had shifted, and someone he trusted had moved before him. That whisper behind Riker wasn't fear, it was betrayal. I saw it in the way his shoulders stiffened before he turned. A man knows when the math stops favoring him. Riker had always trusted numbers, how many guns, how many badges he could call, how many graves his name could fill before sunrise. But he hadn't counted memory. He hadn't counted debt. He turned slow, like he already knew what he'd see, and hated himself for being right. Men stood there, Harlem men. Not soldiers, not saints, fathers, brothers, some with hunting rifles older than their grudges. Some with hands shaking so bad you'd think they'd drop the steel, until you noticed how straight the barrels stayed. They weren't there for Clay. They were there because Clay had been there first. Eli's father stepped forward half a pace, just enough to say, "I speak for this line." "You touch that door," he said, voice raw, "and this street eats you." Riker laughed, but it came out thin. "You boys think this ends well." Clay stood in the doorway, smoke curling behind him, firelight painting his face like a confession. "It ends," Clay said. "That's enough." Riker sneered. "You don't get to decide endings." Clay's eyes didn't leave his. "Funny thing about men who kill for power," he said. "They forget power only works if folks believe in it." A bottle shattered somewhere. Flame flared higher. Heat pressed against the church walls like a threat with lungs. Nina watched all of it from inside, gun still raised, eyes darting between Clay and Riker, between past and present. I could see the war in her face, justice pulling one way, survival pulling the other. Riker made a choice. He lifted his rifle, everything slowed. That's how you know it's real. I moved, 2 steps, angled, not toward Riker, toward the man behind him, the one whose eyes were too eager. The one who'd whispered his name wrong. I locked eyes with him. He hesitated. That's all it took. The shotgun thundered, not Eli's father, someone else. A warning blast into the dirt at Riker's feet. Mud jumped. Firelight danced. Riker flinched back, cursing. Sirens wailed in the distance. That sound changes everything. It doesn't save you. It just forces people to decide faster. Riker scanned the street, calculating exits, losses, witnesses. His men were already stepping back, instinct screaming retreat even if pride hated it. "This ain't done," Riker spat at Clay. Clay nodded. "Nothing ever is." Riker backed away into the rain, melting into the dark with a promise hanging heavier than smoke. Inside the church, coughing, crying, relief tangled with terror. Kids were out, alive, windows broken, walls blackened, the building wounded but standing. Nina lowered the gun for the first time all night. Her hands shook now, not from fear, from aftermath. She walked up to Clay, close enough that only he could hear. "If my father hadn't died," she said, "you wouldn't be standing here." Clay nodded. "I know. And if you die because of this," she continued, "I won't save you." Clay met her eyes. "I'm not asking you to." Sirens grew louder. I leaned back into shadow where I belong, watching faces, who looked relieved, who looked angry, who looked like they were already planning the next move. Because nights like this don't end wars. They announce them. And somewhere in Harlem, a man who lost control tonight was already deciding how much blood he was willing to spend to get it back. Sirens don't bring peace. They bring witnesses. By the time the patrol cars rolled up, smoke was still breathing out of the church like it didn't know whether to live or die. Men stepped back into alleys. Guns disappeared into coats. Faces rearranged themselves into innocence. Riker was gone. Of course he was. Men like that never stay long enough to answer questions. Clay stood on the steps, hands visible, posture calm, like this was exactly where he expected to be when the law arrived. A cop asked something sharp. Clay answered something smooth. Nothing volunteered, nothing denied. Nina watched him from the doorway, revolver lowered now but not put away. A woman like her didn't holster truth that easily. Eli clung to his father. People touched walls, touched each other, confirming reality hadn't slipped out from under their feet. The church would stand another night. That was the headline, but headlines don't tell you who's bleeding inside. I kept my eyes on the crowd, because the real danger never leaves with sirens. It blends back in. That's when I saw him, Caleb Morris. Mid-30s, clean coat, accountant smile. The kind of man who volunteered for committees and remembered birthdays. He was helping an old woman down the steps, gentle as a son, too gentle. His eyes never left Nina, not with anger, with calculation. Caleb had been in that third row earlier. He'd stayed seated when the other two froze. Smart. Survival level smart. I watched him lean toward another man, whisper something quick. The other man stiffened, nodded, then drifted away toward a patrol car. That's when I knew. Riker didn't lose tonight, he outsourced. Inside, Clay felt it too. He always did when the air shifted. He turned slowly, scanning faces, landed on Caleb for just a fraction too long. Caleb met his eyes and smiled. A friendly smile. A dangerous one. Nina stepped down beside Clay. "You see it, don't you?" Clay nodded barely. "Yeah." "They're not done," she said. "No," Clay agreed. "They're reorganizing." A cop approached Nina. "Ma'am, we're gonna need that firearm." She looked at him like he'd asked for her spine. Then she handed it over slow, eyes never leaving Caleb. "Keep it clean," she said. "It's been near truth." The cop didn't know what to do with that. As the crowd thinned, Caleb approached Clay openly now, bold, confident, like a man stepping into a vacancy. "Reverend," he said warmly, "hell of a night." Clay studied him. Funny place to show community spirit. Caleb chuckled. "Someone has to think about tomorrow." Nina's head snapped toward him. "Tomorrow for who?" Caleb's smile didn't fade. "Everyone." That was the lie. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "Riker's reckless, always has been, bad for business." Clay's eyes hardened. "Business." "Influence," Caleb corrected. "Stability, you understand." Clay nodded slowly. "I understand you think tonight created an opening." Caleb shrugged. "Nature hates a vacuum." Nina stepped closer. "And you plan to fill it." Caleb finally looked at her directly. "I plan to keep things orderly." That word again. Men like him love that word. Clay exhaled through his nose. "Order built on fear rots." Caleb smiled wider. "Fear is efficient." Then he straightened, voice normal again. "Rest up, Reverend. Harlem's watching you now." As he walked away, Nina whispered, "He's worse than Riker." Clay didn't disagree. He just said, "Riker wants blood. Men like that want ownership." They stood there, church behind them, streets ahead of them, enemies already adjusting their plans. Nina finally asked the question she'd been circling all night. "What happens now?" Clay looked down the block where Riker had vanished, then toward the buildings where men like Caleb lived behind respectability. "Now," he said quietly, "they stop testing me and start testing you." Nina's jaw set. "I didn't ask for this war." Clay met her eyes. "Neither did your father." Silence stretched between them, heavy and unfinished, and somewhere nearby a phone rang. A message was sent. A new deal was being discussed without their names on it. The kind of deal that ends with someone disappearing. The game had moved again. And this time the next threat wasn't coming loud. It was coming polite. Polite danger moves slower, that's what makes it lethal. By morning Harlem looked normal again. Church steps swept, broken glass gone, smoke scrubbed from the air like it never happened. Folks went to work, kids went to school, shop doors rolled up on schedule, but everybody felt it. That tightness in the chest, that sense of being watched by something that smiled. Nina felt it first. She always did. Teachers learn to notice small changes before they become disasters. 2 of her students didn't show up, not sick, not late, just missing. By noon, a rumor reached her desk before the bell rang. Quiet, careful, passed like contraband. Their uncle worked nights. Said a man came by the apartment early morning. Well-dressed, soft voice, asked questions about Nina Ward, about the church, about who'd been inside. Nina dismissed class early and walked straight to Clay's office. He was already packing papers into a drawer like he'd known she was coming. "They're starting," she said. Clay nodded. "They started last night." She shut the door behind her. "Caleb." "Caleb," Clay confirmed. "And anyone who thinks being invisible makes them safe." Nina folded her arms. "What's his angle?" Clay leaned back, fingers steepled. "Control without noise. Pressure without fingerprints. He'll turn neighbors into informants and favors into debts." "And Riker?" she asked. Clay's mouth tightened. "Riker's muscle, Caleb's mind." Nina paced once, twice. "So what do we do?" Clay looked tired, not scared, tired. Like a man who knew this chapter by heart. "We make them uncomfortable," he said. Nina stopped. "How?" Clay met her eyes. "By refusing to disappear." That afternoon, Caleb Morris hosted a luncheon. Invite only, community leaders, pastors, business owners, men who like to be seen as reasonable. Clay showed up, uninvited. Conversation stalled when he entered. Smiles froze mid-curve. Caleb looked up slowly, surprised but pleased. "Reverend," he said, "didn't expect you." "I know," Clay replied, taking a seat anyway. "That's why I came." Caleb chuckled, bold. "Necessary," Clay said. "I heard you're asking questions about me." Caleb spread his hands, just trying to understand the landscape. Clay leaned in. Then understand this. Anyone you lean on because of me, I will lean back. Caleb's smile thinned. Is that a threat? Clay shook his head. It's a forecast. For a second, just one, Caleb's eyes hardened. Then the smile returned, smoother than before. You're an interesting man, he said. Harlem's changing, it needs stability. Clay stood. It needs honesty. He left before dessert. That night, Nina's front door was unlocked when she came home. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just a single envelope on her table. Inside was a photograph, her classroom taken from across the street. A note on the back, neat handwriting, we prefer cooperation. Nina didn't cry, she didn't scream, she picked up the phone. Clay, she said. They crossed the line. Clay's voice came back calm as ever. Good. Good, she snapped. Yes, he said, because now it's public. What do you mean? Clay paused. Check your window. She pulled the curtain back. Across the street, a car idled, too clean, too still, and behind it, barely visible in the dark, were three men she recognized from the church. Men who'd been saved, men who didn't scare easy anymore. Clay spoke again. They wanted you alone, they didn't get it. Nina swallowed. This ends ugly. Clay didn't deny it. It always does when polite men run out of patience. Silence sat between them heavy. Then Nina asked the question that mattered. Who's going to fall first? Clay answered without hesitation. The one who thinks nobody's watching. And somewhere across Harlem, Caleb Morris was pouring a drink, confident, smiling. Unaware that the board he thought he owned was already learning his name. Caleb Morris slept well that night. Men like him usually do. He believed in layers, committees, paper trails that led nowhere. He believed politeness was armor and silence was currency. He believed monsters announced themselves loud so you could plan around them. That belief was about to cost him. By sunrise, the neighborhood started talking, but not in whispers, in confirmations, in looks that lingered too long, in doors that didn't open as easily when Caleb's people knocked. A shop owner declined a suggestion. A pastor forgot a meeting. A building super who used to smile suddenly claimed he didn't know Caleb at all. That kind of resistance doesn't happen by accident. Clay had made calls, not threats, reminders. He reminded men of nights when their sons came home alive because someone stood between them and fire. He reminded women of papers that never got filed because someone made them disappear. He reminded the quiet ones that politeness doesn't stop a bullet, community does. And Nina went public. She stood on the school steps after dismissal and spoke where parents could hear, where rumors couldn't hide. She didn't name Caleb. She didn't have to. She talked about pressure. About men who smile while they squeeze, about how silence feeds predators. She spoke like a teacher and like a daughter who'd buried a truth too long. Phones came out, heads nodded. A few faces went pale. That night Caleb finally felt it. His phone rang, not his usual people. Unknown number, he answered anyway. Mr. Morris, a voice said, old, calm, familiar in a way that reached back decades. You don't know me, but you know my name. Caleb straightened. Who is this? A man who ran once, the voice said, and lived long enough to learn when not to again. Caleb's jaw tightened. If this is about Reverend Clay. It's about you, the voice interrupted. You've been touching children and teachers and neighbors like they're chess pieces. A pause controlled. That's unwise. Caleb exhaled slowly. You think you scare me? No, the voice said. I think you underestimate how many people remember. The line went dead. Across town, Clay sat alone in the church office, lights low, writing names in a ledger he never showed anyone. Not counts, connections, who trusted who owed who. Who might break. Nina stood in the doorway watching him. You building a case? She asked. Clay didn't look up. I'm building insurance. For who? For Harlem. Outside, a car slowed too much. Didn't stop. Didn't speed up. Clay felt it. So did I, because polite danger doesn't rush. It waits for the moment you relax. and somewhere between Caleb's confidence cracking and Riker's patience running out, someone was about to make a move that couldn't be undone, the kind that forces the whole board to tip, and when that happens, even men who see the game early don't always get to choose who pays first. The move came quiet, too quiet. No sirens, no fire, no shouting in the street. That's how you know it's deliberate. Nina found out just after dusk when a neighbor knocked on her door instead of calling. That alone told her this wasn't small. They took Eli's father, the woman whispered, from the bodega on 116th. Two men, suits, smiles. Nina didn't ask who. She already knew whose handwriting that was. She grabbed her coat and didn't bother locking the door. Clay was already on his feet when she burst into the church office. He felt the absence before the news arrived. Men like him always do. They didn't come loud, Nina said. They wanted him clean. Clay closed his eyes for half a second. Not prayer, calculation. That's Caleb, he said. Riker would have left blood. So what now? Nina demanded. We call the cops. Clay looked at her, really looked. You still think this is a situation police understand? Nina hated that he was right. Clay reached for his coat. We don't react fast, we react correct. Across Harlem, in a borrowed warehouse with no name on the lease, Eli's father sat tied to a chair under clean white lights. No bruises, no broken teeth, just fear served cold. Caleb Morris stood a few feet away, jacket off, sleeves rolled neat. You raised a brave son, Caleb said conversationally. That's admirable, dangerous, but admirable. Eli's father spat on the floor. You gonna kill me, get on with it. Caleb smiled. That's Riker's way, I'm not Riker. He leaned in. I just need you to say Reverend Clay put you up to it. Guns, threats, organization. Silence. Caleb's smile thinned. You don't owe him your life. What? Eli's father lifted his head. I owe him my sons. Caleb straightened. That answer annoyed him more than defiance ever could. Take him to the room, Caleb said. The men hesitated. That room. Caleb nodded. That room. Back at the church, Clay stopped at the door and looked at Nina. They're testing how much pain it takes to break us. Nina's jaw set. They picked the wrong family. Clay's eyes hardened, not with anger but resolve. No, he said, they picked the right one. He stepped into the night, and somewhere between that warehouse and the streets that still believed in him, a clock started ticking, not loud, not dramatic, but unforgiving, because when polite men decide they're done asking, the next move doesn't come with a warning, it comes with a body. Time bends when someone you care about is on the wrong side of a door. Clay didn't rush the streets. Rushing is what predators expect. He moved the way men move when they already know where the trap is and just need to confirm who built it. He stopped at 3 places. Didn't knock. Didn't ask. At the first, a janitor avoided his eyes and unlocked a back gate anyway. At the second, a woman handed him a key she'd been holding onto for years, waiting for the right reason. At the third, a man told him nothing, said he didn't know, but his hands shook in a way that gave the address away. Clay memorized it all, faces, hesitations, the kind of details that don't lie. Nina followed 2 blocks behind, smart enough not to walk at his shoulder. She wasn't carrying a gun this time. She was carrying something heavier, certainty. You ever notice, she said quietly when they finally spoke, how men like Caleb don't touch the dirt themselves? Clay nodded. They hate fingerprints. They stopped across the street from the warehouse. No sign, no windows, just a building pretending to be empty in a neighborhood full of ghosts. A car idled nearby, engine running, one man inside, reading a paper that hadn't been printed that morning. Clay counted exits, side door, rear loading bay, roof access, 2 clean, 2 prepared. This isn't a warning, Nina said. No, Clay agreed. This is leverage. Inside, Eli's father screamed once, just once, not loud, controlled, like someone who didn't want to give them the satisfaction. Nina's nails bit into her palm. We go in. Clay didn't move, not yet. Then when? when they think they've won. Inside the warehouse, Caleb watched from behind the glass, arms folded, expression calm. He hated the scream, not because it bothered him, because it was inefficient. "Stop," he said. "We're not here for pain." The man in the room paused, disappointed. Caleb leaned into the microphone. "Last chance. You say Clay organized violence. You walk out alive." Eli's father lifted his head, blood at the corner of his mouth. "You think men follow Clay because they're scared," he said hoarsely. "You don't get it." Caleb sighed. "I get results." Outside, a second car rolled up and parked too casually. Clay noticed. So did I. That car didn't belong to Caleb, which meant someone else had decided this moment mattered. Clay finally stepped off the curb. "Now," he said. Nina followed, and somewhere inside that warehouse. Before a confession could be forced. Before a deal could be finalized. Someone turned a key they weren't supposed to have. And the balance of the night shifted again. The door opened from the inside. That's the kind of mistake that gets men killed. 1 second the warehouse was sealed tight, confidence thick as concrete. The next, a side door creaked open, slow, too slow to be panic, too deliberate to be accident. Caleb frowned. "That door's locked," he said. No one answered him. The man at the glass reached for his radio. Static answered back. Dead air. The kind that tells you somebody already cut the conversation. Inside the chair, Eli's father lifted his head. Not hope, recognition. "I told you," he said through blood. "Y'all don't understand how Clay works." The lights flickered once. Outside, Clay moved, not fast, not loud. He crossed the threshold like he owned the building, shoulders relaxed, hands visible. The men guarding the hall hesitated, not because they were scared, but because something about him didn't fit the script. Predators expect pleading or rage. Clay brought neither. Nina slipped in behind him, already scanning corners, already counting breaths. She clocked the guard nearest the chair, the way his weight leaned back, the way his finger hovered too close to the trigger. Nervous. New. Caleb stepped into the hallway, irritation leaking through his polish. "Reverend," he said, "this is trespassing." Clay stopped 10 feet away, close enough to be heard. Far enough to stay alive. "You took a man who didn't belong to you," Clay said. "That's theft." Caleb laughed once. "This isn't your lane anymore." Clay tilted his head. "You sure?" Behind Caleb, a door opened. Another. Footsteps echoed, not rushed, measured. Caleb turned. 3 men entered from the rear. Older, calm, the kind who don't introduce themselves because they don't need to. One of them nodded at Clay, not greeting, acknowledgement. Caleb's smile faltered for the first time. "Who are they?" he demanded. Clay answered softly. "They're the reason your phone stopped ringing tonight." Nina moved to Eli's father, cutting the ties with a blade that never flashed. She caught him as his legs gave out. "You good?" she whispered. He nodded. "Good enough." Caleb backed up a step. "Just one, but everyone saw it." "This is unnecessary," Caleb said, voice tight. "We can talk." Clay stepped closer. "You had your talk," he said. "You chose leverage instead of listening." Caleb's eyes darted, calculating exits that no longer belonged to him. "You think this ends clean?" Caleb snapped. "You touch me, you light a fuse you can't put out." Clay met his gaze. "You already lit it." One of the older men spoke for the first time. His voice was dry, final. "Caleb Morris," he said, "you're done operating in this neighborhood." Caleb laughed, sharp, brittle. "You don't have that authority." The man didn't argue. He just raised his phone and pressed play. A recording filled the warehouse. Caleb's voice, calm, precise, ordering pressure, naming names, children, teachers, parents. The room changed. Caleb's face drained of color. "That's illegal." Clay nodded. "So was kidnapping." Nina helped Eli's father toward the door. As they passed Caleb, he looked at her, desperation cracking through the polish. "You let him do this," Caleb said. "You're choosing chaos." Nina stopped, looked him dead in the eye. "No," she said, "I'm choosing who doesn't get power." They left him standing there with men who didn't negotiate. Outside, rain started again. Soft, cleansing, lying. Clay paused at the curb. He didn't look back. Nina asked the question she'd been holding since the church. What happens to him? Clay answered without heat. He'll be remembered as a lesson. And Riker? She asked. Clay's eyes lifted down the block where darkness still had teeth. Riker, he said, won't like losing his mind. Somewhere far off, an engine revved too hard. And in Harlem, a man who thrived on loud violence was about to learn what quiet consequences feel like. The night wasn't over, not even close. Riker didn't hear about it right away. That's how you know the damage was real. Bad news travels fast when it's loud. This news crept, slipped through back channels, paused before it reached him like it wanted to watch his face when it landed. By the time he heard Caleb's name spoken in past tense, it was already too late to save face. Riker was in a basement card room off Lenox, smoke thick, money dirty, men laughing too hard. The kind of place where ego gets comfortable. A runner leaned in and whispered, just a few words. Caleb, warehouse, recording. Riker's smile didn't fade right away. That worried the room. He finished his drink, set the glass down gentle, too gentle. Who's still loyal? He asked. Nobody answered fast enough. That's when Riker understood what had really been taken from him. Not territory, not money, momentum. He stood, grabbed his coat. Get the boys. Outside, Harlem felt different, not safer, sharper. Like the city had chosen a side and hadn't told everyone yet. Clay felt it from the church steps. The air had weighed again. Nina stood beside him, arms crossed, watching a patrol car roll past without slowing. He's coming, she said. Clay nodded. He has to. You ready for that? Clay didn't answer right away. He looked at the street, at the windows, at the people who'd started standing a little straighter without realizing why. I've been ready since the night I stopped running, he said. Inside the church, men gathered. Not a mob, not soldiers, just neighbors who understood that survival doesn't announce itself. Eli's father sat near the front, bandaged, alive. He caught Clay's eye and nodded once. No speeches. No thanks, respect. That's when the lights went out, not the whole block, just the church. Someone knew the breaker. Nina's hand moved instinctively toward where her gun used to be. Clay's voice cut through the dark, calm and precise. Stay where you are. Footsteps outside, slow, heavy, unafraid. Riker's voice came through the door, smiling again. Preacher, he called. You and me got unfinished business. Clay stepped forward, silhouetted by moonlight through stained glass. So do you, he said. The door creaked, and for the first time all night. The danger stopped pretending to be polite. The door didn't fly open. Riker pushed it just enough to remind everyone he controlled how wide things got. Moonlight slid across the floor like a blade. His silhouette filled the frame, broad shoulders, coat heavy, confidence earned the ugly way. Two men stood behind him, not his best, his loudest. That's far enough, Nina said from the dark. Riker laughed. You again. Teacher got a real mouth on her. Clay stepped into the light before Nina could answer. Calm, centered, like the room belonged to him even without power. You lost tonight, Clay said. Riker shook his head. Nah, I just lost patience. He took one step in. The men behind him fanned slightly. Bad formation, too much ego. Riker always believed fear would fix the math. You embarrassed me, Riker continued. Cost me a thinker, cost me face. Clay didn't argue. You cost yourself that. Riker's smile twisted. See, that's the thing about you. You think because folks stood up tonight you won. He leaned closer, voice dropping. They stood up because I let them. The men inside the church shifted. A chair scraped. Someone breathed too loud. Riker noticed. He loved that part. I burned this place down, he said. Half of M hide, the other half begged me to stop. That's how this city works. Clay's eyes didn't leave his. That's how it used to. Riker snorted. You really believe that? Before Clay could answer, a sound rolled in from outside. Engines, not one, several, not revving. Idling, Riker's men glanced back, just a flicker, enough. Riker didn't turn. Pride locked his neck. You got friends now. He said, that's cute. Clay finally smiled. Not wide, not kind. I got witnesses, he said. Sirens rose in the distance. Not close, not yet, but coming, enough to change decisions. Riker's jaw tightened. He weighed it. You could see the calculation burning behind his eyes. This ain't finished, he said. Clay nodded. It never is. Riker backed out slow, eyes never leaving Clay, then disappeared into the dark with his men. The lights snapped back on. Everyone exhaled at once. Nina leaned toward Clay. He'll come back louder. What? Clay looked at the door, then at the people behind him. No, he said quietly. He'll come back desperate. Outside, engines faded, but one car stayed, parked, waiting, and from the way Clay's shoulders tightened just a fraction, I knew the next move wasn't coming from Riker. It was coming from someone who'd been quiet all night. That car didn't idle like a threat, it idled like a decision. Everyone else drifted off once the lights came back. Relief has a short attention span. Folks hugged, whispered, promised to check on each other in the morning. Survival makes people tired before it makes them brave. Clay stayed by the door. So did Nina. Neither of them spoke. They were listening to what wasn't being said. Headlights stayed on across the street, engine low, patient. Whoever sat inside wasn't waiting for backup. They were waiting for isolation. That ain't Riker, Nina said. Clay nodded. Riker needs noise. Minutes passed. The street thinned. A patrol car rolled by, slowed, then moved on. The headlights never flickered. Finally, the driver's door opened. One man stepped out. No rush. No weapon visible, coat neat, hat low. He walked like someone who expected to be seen and didn't mind it. Clay exhaled through his nose. That's law. Nina's jaw tightened. Real law or rented? The man crossed the street and stopped at the base of the church steps. He didn't look up right away. He looked at the building, the windows, the scorch marks clean but not erased. Then he raised his eyes. Reverend Clay, he said, voice smooth, educated. Southern edges sanded down. Mind if we talk? Clay didn't step forward. You're already here. The man smiled, fair. He reached into his coat slowly, deliberately, and pulled out a badge. Not local, federal. Nina stiffened. The man held it just long enough to be clear, then tucked it away. Name S. Harris, he said. I've been watching this neighborhood a long time. Clay's eyes narrowed. From where? From a desk, Harris replied, and from files that never made sense until recently. Nina stepped up beside Clay. If this is about tonight. It's about before tonight, Harris cut in gently, and after. He glanced at Nina, then back to Clay. You've been very busy, Harris said, preventing crimes, interrupting patterns. Making men disappear from influence, without making them disappear from Earth. Clay didn't deny it. I don't like graves. Harris smiled thin. I noticed. He took a step closer, not aggressive, curious. Here's the thing, Harris said. Men like Riker, easy, loud, sloppy. Men like Caleb, trickier, but they leave paper. He leaned in just enough to lower his voice. But men like you don't fit clean anywhere. Nina felt it then, that shift, when a conversation stops being friendly and starts being about leverage. What do you want? Clay asked. Harris straightened. Options. He pulled an envelope from his coat, thick, heavy. Inside that, Harris said, are names, investigations, timelines, things that can either stay open or close. Nina's eyes burned. You threatening him? What? Harris shook his head. I'm recruiting him. Clay didn't reach for the envelope. You already know what I am, Clay said. Why pretend you don't? Harris nodded slowly. Because men like you only work when they think they chose the job. Silence stretched. The street felt smaller. Riker's not done, Harris said. You know that, and the next man after him will be quieter, smarter, worse. He held the envelope out again. You can keep doing this alone, he said, or you can do it with cover. Nina looked at Clay. Don't. Clay didn't look at her. He was watching Harris. And the cost? Clay asked. Harris met his eyes. Eventually, you're past. That word landed heavy. Clay's hand finally moved, not to take the envelope, to push it back. You don't own my sins, Clay said. And you don't get to spend them. Harris's smile faded, not anger, disappointment. That's a shame, he said, because someone will. He stepped back, tipping his hat. Think about it, Harris added, before someone less polite comes knocking. He turned and walked back to the car. Engine started, headlights flared. Nina finally breathed. That man scares me more than Riker. Clay watched the car disappear. He should, he said, because he thinks in decades. Nina studied him. What happens if he comes back? Clay's voice dropped, quiet and certain. Then the game stops being local. He turned toward the dark sanctuary, shoulders heavy again. And when that happens, he added, every move costs more than blood. Inside the church, something creaked, not footsteps, a floorboard. Somebody else had stayed behind. That floorboard creak wasn't old wood, it was weight. Clay's hand lifted slowly, not a signal, a promise. Stay here, he murmured to Nina. She ignored him and shifted left, putting a pew between her and the sound. Smart. Angles matter when the lights lie. The sanctuary was empty, or pretending to be. Shadows stretched long now that the power was back, corners holding onto secrets like they were paid to. Show yourself, Clay said, voice calm enough to make a guilty conscience itch. Silence answered. Then a slow clap, once, twice. It came from near the choir stand. A man stepped forward into the light, mid-40s, plain suit, ordinary face. The kind you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting him. That's not an accident, that's training. Reverend, the man said, you disappoint me. Nina felt her spine tighten. You friends with Harris? The man smiled faintly. Friends is a strong word. Clay studied him. You're not law. No, the man agreed. I'm consequence. He walked a few steps closer, hands empty, posture relaxed. You've been a problem, he continued. Not because you break rules, because you make other people stop following them. Clay didn't argue. People don't need permission to do right. The man tilted his head. That's a dangerous philosophy. Nina snapped, who sent you? The man glanced at her. Someone who doesn't like variables. He looked back at Clay. Riker is noise, Harris is paperwork. You, he said softly, your influence, and influence spreads. Clay's eyes hardened. So you're here to kill me? The man shrugged. If I was, you wouldn't hear me talking. That was the wrong answer, because it meant something worse. I'm here to mark you, the man said, so everyone who matters knows where you stand. He reached into his jacket, not fast, not slow, measured. Nina moved. Don't. The man's hand came out holding a phone. He tapped the screen, turned it so Clay could see. A live image. Eli sitting on his bed, at home, safe. Then the camera angle shifted, another feed, a classroom, Nina's classroom, empty for now. The man met Clay's eyes. You protect this place, he said. That makes it leverage. Nina's breath went shallow. You touch those kids. The man didn't even look at her. This is your warning, he told Clay. Next time it won't be polite. Next time we don't knock. He stepped back into shadow. Choose carefully, his voice echoed, because the board just got bigger. And then he was gone. No doors, no footsteps, just absence. Nina's voice broke the silence. Clay, what did he mean by mark you? Clay stared at the spot where the man had stood. It took him a long moment to answer. He means, Clay said quietly, we're officially in a game where nobody wins clean. Outside, somewhere far off, a single gunshot cracked the night. Not close enough to explain, not far enough to ignore. And in Harlem, every smart player felt it at the same time. The warning phase was over. That gunshot wasn't random. Random sounds fade, this one stayed. Clay didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Neither did Nina. In this line of work, whether you call it survival, leadership, or sin, you learn that the first reaction is usually the wrong one. Then Clay spoke. That wasn't meant for us. Nina's voice was tight. How do you know? Because if it was, he said, we wouldn't be standing. They stepped outside together. The street looked the same. Too same. People peeked from windows and pulled back. Somewhere a radio played low like the night needed company. A boy came running from down the block, breath ragged, fear dragging behind him. "They got Mr. Alvarez," he blurted. "Outside his shop." Clay closed his eyes. Alvarez wasn't muscle, wasn't leadership. He fixed shoes and minded his business. He'd let Clay use his phone once. That was enough. They reached the corner fast. Alvarez lay on the sidewalk, alive but broken, blood on his sleeve, eyes wide with something worse than pain understanding. A single bullet hole in the wall behind him, inches from his head. A message. Nina knelt. Who did this? Alvarez swallowed. Didn't see faces, he rasped, just heard a voice. Clay leaned closer. What did it say? Alvarez's eyes locked on his. "Tell the preacher," he whispered, "he's not special anymore." Sirens came late, they always do. Nina stood slowly, rage sharp, now focused. "They're making examples." Clay nodded. "They're testing response time. And if we don't respond—" Clay looked down the street where the shadows thickened. "Then they escalate." Nina clenched her fists. "So what's the move?" Clay straightened, shoulders set, not angry, resolved. "We stop absorbing," he said. "We redirect." She searched his face. "How?" Clay's gaze lifted toward the rooftops, the windows, the places where eyes hide. "We remind them," he said, "that influence cuts both ways." A car rolled past slow, too slow. The driver didn't look at them. That mattered more than if he had. Nina noticed it too. They're watching everything now. Clay's mouth curved into something that wasn't a smile. "Good," he said. "That means they'll see what happens next." He turned back toward the church, already thinking 3 moves ahead. Behind them, Alvarez was loaded into an ambulance. Alive, shaken, carrying a story that would travel faster than fear. And somewhere in Harlem, someone higher up the chain, someone who hadn't spoken yet, was deciding whether Clay was still worth warning. Or finally worth erasing. Targets don't get warnings, they get windows. The city shifted again before sunrise. Not loud, not dramatic, just subtle things falling out of place. Patrol routes changed. Phones rang and didn't get answered. A few men who usually leaned on corners weren't there anymore. Clay noticed all of it. He sat alone in the church office, coat still on, lights off, listening to the building breathe. Nina paced the sanctuary, restless, every instinct screaming that the clock had sped up. "They're clearing lanes," she said. "That means something big." Clay nodded. "It means permission." From somewhere uptown, a call was made. Not to Riker. Not to Harris. Above them, past them. To someone who didn't need names, just confirmations. Is he still refusing? Yes. Is he still central? Yes. Then proceed. By noon, the first piece fell. A warrant, not for Clay, not yet for the church. Zoning violations, fire safety, assembly permits, paper weapons, clean, legal, suffocating. Inspectors arrived with clipboards and polite smiles. No threats, just consequences stacked neatly. Nina watched from the steps, fists clenched. "They're strangling the space." Clay stood beside her. "They're isolating the symbol." Inside, men who'd gathered for meetings were turned away. No arguing, no scene, just locked doors and posted notices. By afternoon, the second piece moved. A rumor hit the streets, seated careful and slow. Clay was cooperating with federal interests, trading names, protecting himself. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. Doubt does more damage than bullets when it's aimed right. Nina heard it at the school, parents pulling kids back, conversations stopping when she entered a room, fear choosing a new direction to run. She confronted Clay that night. "They're turning people," she said, softly, the worst way. Clay didn't deny it. "That's the plan." "So what's ours?" she asked. Clay looked at the ledger on his desk. Names, connections, history written in ink and memory. "Our move," he said, "is to make them rush." Nina frowned. "You just said they're patient." "They are," Clay agreed, "until they think they're losing control." He closed the ledger. "We give them something they can't manage quietly." Outside, thunder rolled, not rain, just sound, the city flexing. Nina studied him. "This is where people die." Clay met her eyes. "This is where pretending stops." Across Harlem, men received messages they didn't like. Meetings were called early, voices sharpened, timelines pulled forward, and somewhere far above street level, a decision-maker who hated unpredictability looked at the board and said the word that ends conversations. Now. That night, as Clay locked the church doors for what might be the last time, a car with no plates turned the corner, and this time it didn't slow down. The car didn't miss. That was the first thing Clay noticed. No screech, no hesitation, no warning shot pretending to be mercy. It came straight down the block like it knew the measurements of the street better than the people who lived on it. Nina saw it a half-second earlier than Clay did, enough time to grab his coat and pull. Metal screamed. Glass exploded. The front steps of the church vanished in a burst of sparks and stone. The car plowed through the iron railing like it had been waiting years for permission. They hit the ground hard. Breath knocked loose. Ears ringing with that hollow sound that means you're still alive but the night isn't done with you. The car didn't stop. It tore past the church and disappeared into the dark. Mission completed. Not a hit. A message. Nina rolled to her knees, coughing. That was for you. Clay pushed himself up slower, feeling ribs argue with him. No, he said. That was for everyone watching. Lights snapped on up and down the block. Windows filled with faces. Phones came out. Fear turned public. That's when Clay understood the play. They weren't trying to kill him, they were daring him to stay. Sirens followed late, chasing something already gone. Police asked questions nobody answered. A report would be written. Blame would be softened. The system would protect itself. Nina stood beside Clay as the crowd murmured. They want you to leave, she said. Disappear, make this quiet again. Clay looked at the shattered steps, the broken rail, the people watching him decide. Yes, he said, and if I do, they win forever. Nina searched his face. Then what's the move? Clay exhaled. We make noise they can't clean up. That night, Clay opened the church doors anyway. Candles replaced lights. People came, slowly at first, then in waves, not for prayer, for witness. Clay stood at the pulpit, bruised, unbowed. I won't be here forever, he told them. But what we build tonight might. Outside, somewhere high above the streets, a call went out. He didn't run. He didn't break. Authorization was given, and the next move wouldn't be a warning. Noise spreads faster than fear when it's honest. By midnight, the candles inside that church had multiplied. 1 became 10. 10 became 100. Word moved the old way, mouth to mouth, door to door, window to window. No flyers, no speeches. Just a simple sentence passed like contraband. He stayed. Men who hadn't stepped inside a church in years showed up and stood in the back. Women who'd learned to keep their heads down sat in the front, shoulders squared. Even a few faces that had been avoiding Clay all week slipped in, quiet, ashamed, listening. Outside, cars circled, unmarked, patient, watching the count. Clay didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Silence leaned toward him. They think power disappears if you scare it enough, he said. That's only true when power belongs to one man. He let that sit. They hit these steps tonight to remind you who they think owns this block, but ownership only works if we agree to it. Nina stood off to the side, scanning exits, clocking faces. She caught one man near the door touching his ear, listening to something that wasn't the sermon. She met his eyes. He looked away. Outside, the decision-makers watched the crowd grow instead of shrink. That wasn't part of the model. Models hate variables they can't intimidate. At 12:43 a.m., the order changed. Not remove him, contain the fallout. 3 cars rolled in at once. Not rushing, official enough to look lawful. Men stepped out wearing plain clothes and serious expressions. No badges shown, no names given. One of them approached the steps. Reverend Clay, he called, we need to speak with you. Clay didn't move. You're welcome to come inside, he replied calmly. Everyone else did. That line rippled through the room. A few quiet laughs, nervous but real. The man stiffened. This isn't a request. Clay nodded. Neither is what you've been doing. Nina stepped forward. On what grounds? The man glanced at her. National interest. Clay finally stepped down from the pulpit and walked to the door. He stopped just short of crossing the threshold. "You take me tonight," he said. "You do it in front of witnesses." Phones rose immediately. Light bloomed in the dark. The men hesitated. This was the problem with acting late. The audience had already arrived. One of the car's engines cut. A door opened again. Another man stepped out, older, sharper, unmistakably higher up. He studied the scene, the crowd, the phones, the calm. Then he looked at Clay. "You've made your point," the man said. Clay met his eyes. "I've made a choice." The man held the stare a second longer, then nodded once. "Stand down," he said quietly. The plainclothes men retreated, irritation hidden behind discipline. Cars rolled away. The street exhaled as one. Nina let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "You just embarrass people who don't forgive that." Clay turned back toward the pulpit. "I didn't embarrass them," he said. "I limited them." But even as the crowd settled, as candles burned low and people began to leave, Clay knew the truth. They wouldn't come for him again like that. Next time they'd come for the ending, and endings always cost more than beginnings. He closed his eyes for a moment, not in prayer but in preparation. One part left, one move, and no room left for mistakes. Endings don't announce themselves. They show up looking like routine. 3 weeks passed. No cars, no calls, no warnings dressed up as courtesy. The church steps were repaired, the rail welded back into place. Life slid forward like it always does when it thinks the danger moved on. That's when Clay knew it was close. The last move never comes loud. Loud is emotional. Loud leaves fingerprints. This was quiet. On a Tuesday morning, Clay didn't open the church. No sign, no message, just locked doors and an empty pulpit. By noon, Nina felt it, the wrong kind of absence. She walked the block twice, checked the office, the back rooms, the places he always paused. Nothing. On Clay's desk sat the ledger. Open, not the names. The last page. One line, written clean and deliberate. "Power doesn't fall, it transfers." Nina understood immediately. Clay hadn't been taken. He de-stepped out of the equation. Across Harlem, things shifted in ways only people who live inside systems can feel. Pressure eased where it used to bite. Certain men stopped returning calls. Certain doors opened without argument. Riker disappeared 2 days later. No body, no rumor, just gone. Caleb's name followed soon after, scrubbed clean from conversations like he'd never mattered. The machine didn't break. It recalibrated. And Clay had forced the recalibration by removing himself as the variable they couldn't control. Weeks later, Nina received a package. No return address. Inside was a single key and a note written in Clay's hand. The work doesn't stop because one man leaves. It stops when people forget why it mattered. The key fit the basement door of the church. Inside, Nina found what Clay had been building quietly all along. Not weapons, not money, records, connections, leverage that didn't belong to any one person, a structure designed to survive him. Nina sat on the steps that night watching the block breathe, kids playing, neighbors arguing, life continuing, imperfect and alive. She finally understood what Clay had done. He didn't win. He positioned Harlem so it couldn't be easily owned again. Somewhere far away, quiet, unremarkable, untraceable, Clay woke up to another morning where nobody knew his name. That was the price. No pulpit, no praise, no protection. Just the knowledge that the game kept moving. And this time, it wasn't rigged against the people who lived inside it. In Harlem, they'd never say his name out loud. But when trouble slowed instead of spreading. When power hesitated instead of swinging. When men thought twice before deciding who was disposable. They felt him, and that was enough.